My name is Chris, though you might recognize my voice from another channel called Stoehovve, where I do various tutorial videos for Fantasy Grounds Unity. In this collaboration with Smiteworks, I will be walking you through the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Fizban's Treasury of Dragons supplement module from a Dungeon Master's point of view. The Fizban Treasury of Dragons supplement was released in October of 2021, and is a supplement guide that expands on all things related to dragons. In relation to a Dungeon Master, these are going to include details on how dragons originated, who their gods are, how they procreate, organizations that worship dragons and that dragons work with, and how dragons become more powerful. Additionally, there are going to be extensive details on all 20 variations of dragons that are included in this supplement. There will also be details on how to create lairs for dragons, defining what they look like, where to place them in your campaign world, as well as how dragons would use them. And there is much more detail in relation to the Dragon's Horde, including the concept of horde items that have absorbed some of the power from the dragon, as well as sort of awakened because of that process, and how multiple hordes link to one another. And finally, the supplement also explains what happens when a dragon dies. From a Dungeon Master's perspective, this is not a campaign guide that contains new adventures, but it does explain how to set up new adventures that would involve dragons, kind of like how the Dungeon Master's guide does not provide an adventure, but it explains how to create them. As this module contains details for players and Dungeon Masters, I have recorded 2 separate videos to reduce the risk of spoiling critical details to players who would rather not have those specific elements spoiled for them. This particular video is thus oriented towards the Dungeon Master, so if you are a player and don't want to spoil any of the surprise, this would be a good time to avoid watching the rest of this video and simply watch the player version of the video, which I will put a link to in the description below. The module itself is available on the Fantasy Grounds store as well as the Steam Marketplace, and you can find links to both of those locations here and here directly from the Wizards of the Coast Dungeons & Dragons product page for Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. It is also included in bundles as well, so if you have a large number of modules already and wish to save some additional cash, you can make use of these bundles in order to do so. This module can be used independent of the other core modules such as the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster's Manual. However, there are some aspects of this particular module that do physically require those modules to be loaded in order for certain parts of them to function, such as the treasure tables, for example. As a result, I do recommend that if you do not already own those 2 supplements, you purchase those particular modules and make sure that they are loaded at the time that you load up Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. From a player's point of view, the player's handbook is going to be required by those players in order for them to be able to create a character that links to the monk or the ranger class specializations that are included in this module. And as such, you should also have that module on hand to provide to the players when they connect to your campaign. To ensure you have access to the correct modules, I will provide links to the Fantasy Grounds and Steam online stores in the description below. I will also include links to the various bundles that each of these modules is included in specifically for your convenience. But with that, let's get into the module itself. As the Dungeon Master, it is the responsibility of your campaign server to feed the modules over to the various players that are going to be connecting to your system. And in order for you to be able to load the module itself, you need to have purchased it through the links I provided earlier, and then run the Fantasy Grounds Updater utility. This will make the module available within Fantasy Grounds Unity for yourself as well as for your players through the library category, specifically under the modules panel. Now, as you can see here, I've already got it loaded, but I'm going to go ahead and unload these so that you can see how that's done. If you have never run Fantasy Grounds Unity as a Dungeon Master before, you will most likely not have any modules loaded at all. If you've never run Fantasy Grounds Unity before, and this is the very first time that you're doing it, you will most likely be presented with a brand new campaign setup panel, and this is going to happen every single time you start a brand new campaign. You'll want to click the Next button, and then down here at the bottom, you'll see the 5e Core Rules button, as well as the 5e All Rules button. Both of these buttons will load a different grouping of modules, but the 5e All Rules will also load all of the modules that will be loaded by the 5e Core Rules button. So it's generally easier to simply click on the 5e All Rules button, which, by the way, will load all of the modules that you have available, with one exception. Fizban's doesn't get loaded through this method at the time of this particular recording. However, I am showing this to you in the hopes that at some point in the future that does change. Now, as we can see here, all of the modules that I have loaded on this machine and have downloaded have been loaded into Fantasy Grounds Unity, and it has populated the modules field here. Unfortunately, Fizban's is not included, so I'm going to show you the other way to be able to pull that into place after you've gone ahead and clicked on that particular button. Now, I've gone ahead and offloaded all of those modules once again. Specifically, what you will want to do is you will want to click this activation button down here at the bottom left, or at least that's where it's located at the time of this recording. You will then want to search for Fizban, and what you will see are 3 modules, and it's up to you as to whether you load this player's module up, as it's not going to be necessarily required by your system. The 2 modules that you should load are the main module supplement, as well as the map one if you're planning on using any of the layers in a particular campaign. This player's one here is only required if you want to be able to look at the specifics of anything that would be classified as a player supplement portion of this particular module. I'm going to load it just in case, but I shouldn't need to worry about that. I've intentionally left the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monsters Manual unloaded in order to show you what happens a little bit later on in the video, and at that point I'll bring at least the Dungeon Master's Guide into the loading system here in order to show you how that fixes a few things. But for now, this should be all you need in order to follow along with the rest of this particular video. The Fizban's Treasury of Dragons module provides all of the data you are ever going to need on dragons that has not already been included in other supplements. And in fact, this module sort of collates a lot of that information into one central resource, though you will want to periodically refer to those other resources just to make sure that everything lines up the way that you want it to. It also closes off a number of open questions that other modules created, specifically of how dragons procreate, how they came into being in the first place, who they worship, and what happens when they die. The most important of these elements are going to be found in the reference manual itself. And that is accessible right from the modules panel, and you will see a chaptered structure, if you will, of all of the contents of the module that has been loaded into the system. One thing I want to point out here is that you will also find links to your story templates and magic item templates here, rather than having to go through the story button and then the templates button here, as well as the items system and then going to templates there. You will find a bunch of other magical items there. Those are all templates. Sometimes it's just easier to access it from here. However, the rest of the information can be found under the following panels. The Images panel, for example, is going to contain all of the images and maps, once you've loaded the maps portion of the module, found within the printed and PDF copies of the supplement, including all 15 example layers. The Items panel is going to contain all of the items introduced by this supplement, as well as pre-generated horde items that have absorbed a dragon's magic, and we'll get to those in a bit. The NPCs panel contains all of the stat blocks for all of the creatures that are introduced by this particular module. A lot of them are going to be dragon-based, some of them are just simply draconic-inspired creatures. In any event, all of those creatures will be found here. The Tables panel is going to contain all of the tables used for generating details about a given dragon, their horde treasure, and all of the other tables that you might use during various adventures, including during character creation. And finally, the Spells panel is going to contain all of the Dungeon Master's copy of the spells associated with this particular module. And you can see here that there are duplications that are currently happening, and that is because I have both the Players and the Dungeon Master's modules loaded. So you can see you don't necessarily need the Players module loaded here. If you have not loaded the Players module, this is going to be a complete list of the panels that you yourself will have available to you as the Dungeon Master. However, if you did load that particular module, you will also find things under the classes listing, under the feats, and under the races panel here. If you want to see more details about those specific panels, I highly recommend that you watch the player version of this video, and that way it avoids some of the duplication in relation to the content that I'm covering. The best place to start is actually within the reference manual itself, and this is because this is going to contain the bulk of the information that you might be looking for. In fact, a large portion of the details within the reference manual will not be found anywhere else, as these are not really story or quest related elements that have been defined, but references on how to create those story or quest related elements within campaigns with a better understanding of Dragonkind overall. Chapter 3 is going to be a good spot to start, as you will learn a lot of information about dragons that you would not necessarily find anywhere else, and a lot of the information that is here is going to include details like where dragons came from and what are their beliefs. What gods do they worship, and what is their expected lifespan, and how do they reproduce? What happens to a dragon on their death, or transition to on death? What are their echoes, and how do they relate to a power that a dragon can obtain? How do dragons move about the world without being revealed? What organizations, minions, and followers will dragons interact with? What happens when players encounter dragons? And different ways to roleplay a dragon, be they as a monster, schemer, or simply a force of power. Chapter 4 will come into play when you're looking to create a dragon lair or populate it with a dragon horde, and in that particular chapter you're going to learn what defines a dragon lair and how does each type of dragon make use of it. What effects happen in the region near a dragon's lair, and how far does that effect expand out? Do dragons have one or more layers? If so, how are they linked together? How does the treasure horde define the available options for a dragon in relation to their lair actions? What does a horde contain? Though you will also want to refer to Chapter 2 around magic items that are kept in a horde, and how they can absorb some of that dragon's magical power. And finally, how to create that horde. And you may want to refer to the previous chapter on how those hordes link together if you want to be able to expand on what that dragon's capacity and capabilities are. Chapter 5 is the last chapter that you will need to go over, but you can do this a little bit more selectively because this is where all of the various types of dragons are physically defined, and it's going to include the following details. It will discuss the type of that particular dragon, including what they stand for, what their desires are, their personalities and ideals, and how they can interact with the world around them. You will find information on their connections with the people around their lairs, or even in their lairs. There will be different hooks that you can use to include them in your own campaigns, and you'll find example lairs that you can use that are unique to a given kind of dragon. And lastly, you're going to find more details about the treasures that would be typically found in their hordes based on the type of that particular dragon, because every dragon type has a little bit of a different set of likes. Using all of the information spread over these chapters, you'll be able to gain significant insight into dragonkind and how they can be used within any campaign that you wish to create, in any world that you would like to place them in, even as they relate to the various planes of existence, if you're looking at going into the Great Worm concepts. While this particular module doesn't include any pre-generated story entries, it is still an easy way to gain access to the story templates panel that you can see here that includes a very basic template involved in creating a few minor details around the dragon itself that you're looking to possibly create. This process differs slightly from utilizing tables to create something like a brass or a red dragon, as this dragon is not necessarily going to be linked to any of the existing types because that's going to be left up to you. What this template is going to do is provide a basis of that particular dragon. Specifically, what do they look like? What are their mannerisms? It'll give you a couple of details around their bonds and their flaws and their secrets, as well as a few example names that you can use in order to create the NPC creature that you're going to want to utilize in your campaigns. Think of it as essentially a generic concept for the dragon that you can then choose to keep as it is, making a new type of dragon, or as the basis for one of the existing types, such as a red, black, brass, gold, platinum, or whatever. I will be going into more detail around this a little bit later in the video when I actually go through the process of creating a particular dragon. As such, I really just wanted to show you how you gain access to this template. The Images panel allows you to directly access various images that you can then share to players as needed, as well as the various types of maps, and you can see that through this particular dropdown here. In this particular case, the individual who converted this particular supplement into Fantasy Grounds Unity, and I believe that was Zacchaeus, broke this particular grouping of categories into the following groups: artwork, decals, maps for dungeon masters, maps for players, and NPCs. The one thing I'd like to point out is that the Dungeon Master maps can be found under the Maps-D&D Fizban's Treasury of Dragons group, which is this one here, while the player maps are going to be found under the Maps-D&D Fizban's Treasury of Dragons-Maps group, which is right here. All of the maps associated with the Dungeon Master's variant of these maps are blank, meaning there are no pins that you can use to click on because none of this has been defined. This is left for you to simply use as examples and then populate them as you see fit. You can choose to use these layer maps to get you going quickly, or you can use them as inspiration to create your own maps utilizing various map asset packs or external software in order to create them. The player maps, however, are set up with line of sight and lighting capabilities already linked into them. So if I go ahead and unlock this and look at the lights panel, we can see that there are a number of lights already placed on the map, as well as all of the line of sight definitions are in place as well. And this is why I say utilizing these particular example maps will save you some time, because all of the line of sight and lighting functionality is already linked into it. All you have to do is supply the story within that particular layer, such as the descriptions to each of the rooms, what dragon is in there, or dragons if there's multiple, are there any NPCs, where's their treasure hoard, where are all of the traps, all of that set of descriptions that you can use to provide to the players as they process and go through this particular dragon lair. As I said earlier, the NPCs panel contains all of the stat blocks for the various kinds of creatures that this supplement introduces, including the different variations of a given dragon based on their age. If you were not already aware, dragons have multiple growth states, with the youngest dragons being called wormlings and the most powerful dragons being called great worms. The intermediate stages include young, adult, and ancient, so you have a number of options to choose from, but be careful, as a great worm, if you decide to go with that particular dragon, could be viewed as a world-ending dragon due to its size and power. I've gone ahead and searched for an emerald dragon. In this particular case, we can see that we have a wormling, we have the young, the adult, the ancient, and the great worm. Don't worry about this gem stalker, because that is another creature that is introduced by this particular module. But all of the other ones that I've discussed are all the various growth stages and the ages associated with a given dragon type. Additionally, their hordes link directly to their age, with the wormlings only having a small horde and the great worms achieving such power that they don't really need one. In fact, they might have started consuming them, or their hordes are stored in almost inaccessible dimensions or planes of existence that only they know about. So choosing the age of your dragon is going to be very important. Other kinds of creatures that come about due to the influence a dragon's magic has in an area, or have been inspired by dragonkind or corrupted by their power, also exist in this listing. These include dragon familiars that dragons will use as agents to interact with various civilizations, magically created creatures, as well as abominations that can happen when magic corrupts a given creature. Fizban's Treasury of Dragons also introduces a large number of new tables that you have as a resource when creating anything that might relate to a dragon, including complications that might occur during an encounter with a dragon. The bulk of these tables relate to a given type of dragon, such as the Moonstone or a red dragon, and provide you a set of randomized options that you can use while creating a dragon. Other tables are going to help with the creation of lairs or backstories or a given dragon's context, surge magic, and many other aspects that you can use as part of a given campaign. In a lot of cases, these tables can be used directly as part of a randomization series of rolls to help create a given dragon or their lair, but they can also be used to help when defining their hordes, taking what can usually be a tedious task and simplifying it for you. How you eventually use them is entirely up to you, but I'll be creating a dragon lair a little bit later on in this video, or more specifically populating one of the existing ones, just to kind of give you an idea as to what that process might look like. At some point in time, you're most likely going to have a character who is given a specific item as a reward, or something that they have found in a Dragon Horde. In some cases, these can be items that have more or less steeped in the magical aura of a dragon so long that their very nature has now changed. These kinds of items have 4 distinct states, and as a result have been created as individualized items to help simplify the process of giving them to their players. For example, I've searched for a cold battle axe, and as you can see, there are variations for that particular battle axe, of which the order is slumbering, stirring, wakened, and ascendant, and these can relate directly to the age of a given dragon. Slumbering items can be found in any horde, and that primarily comes down to the fact that an item has to steep within that dragon's magic for a period of time before it gains the slumbering state. But not all items are going to be able to do that. For example, if you just took a normally crafted longsword, left it in a Dragon Horde for, I think it's a year, and then went back to get it, there's no guarantee that that item has elevated itself to a slumbering weapon. The quality and craftsmanship of that particular item has to be able to absorb that dragon's magic and not break in the process in order for it to elevate its state from a non-magical item into a magically slumbering item. But the same thing can be said for any of the other states that a weapon can be in, and that comes down to the age of the dragon. Starting with a young dragon, an item can have the stirring state as its discovered tier of wakefulness, whereas the weakened would be found in an adult Dragon Horde, and the ascendant would be found in an ancient Dragon Horde. And that can occur at the time of the weapon's discovery, meaning that it's already achieved that state before a player or a party has found it. Those items are somewhat unique in that they have to have been present in that horde for an extended period of time before they can actually acquire those particular states. An item doesn't simply start as an ascendant item, it has to go through the slumbering, stirring, wakened, and then finally ascendant states before it can be classified as one. There are, however, ways to improve upon an item's awakened state, but it can't go past ascending. So if you took a slumbering item and you placed it in another dragon's horde that is older than the dragon where it was discovered, or shortly after that particular dragon had been killed or died, as long as the age of that dragon can create a higher state than what it was previously, that item's state will increase. It is possible for a party to take a slumbering item, and then at the time of an older dragon's death, let's say a youngling dragon, they could leave that item there for a period of 8 hours, or essentially the duration of a long rest, and that piece of equipment or item, or whatever you want to call it, can go from the slumbering into a stirring state. Be careful though, increasing the state of a slumbering weapon that is steeped in a young white dragon's lair and then killing an adult dragon and steeping that particular weapon in that dragon's magical aura will change the properties from cold to fire. However, the supplement doesn't really define what happens when an item that has no awakened properties is present at the time that a dragon dies, so I suspect that is really left up to you, the Dungeon Master, to determine what happens there. In order for items of this nature to remain awakened, if you will, they must be attuned to a creature, otherwise they are going to decrease their state every 30 days until it has reached the slumbering state once again, so slumbering is as low as they can fall. Other useful items can also be found in this listing, and some of those might be artistic in nature and may even be unique items that were found in a particular dragon's collection, while others might simply be magical items that can be created to complement the various kinds of elemental magic that a dragon is usually linked to, so you'll want to take a look through those items. The last panel I want to go over before looking at creating a dragon or a lair is the spells panel itself. This panel simply contains the new spells the supplement adds to the various spellcasting classes that a given player or even an NPC or a creature can use during combat situations. There's nothing really overcomplicated in this listing, with one exception, and that is the Nether's Mischief spell, as it's going to require a caster to roll on a mischievous surge table when cast to figure out what the effect is going to occur within the cube that is created by that spell. There are 4 possible effects that can happen, each are unique in their own way, so just be aware of this when a player or an NPC is about to cast that spell. With Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, creating a unique dragon for your campaign is now relatively simplified, and the complexity comes around how much detail you want to create about that dragon itself. Before you create a dragon, you need to consider the following things. Is this going to be a benevolent, neutral, or evil dragon? How old is the dragon? What is its purpose in the story? Is it the end boss? Is it simply an agent that ensures the players are heading in the right direction? Is it something the players can simply stumble upon randomly during their adventure? Were they directed here by a village elder because their village is under constant threat of a dragon? Or is there a cult or a faction that is working with the dragon? All of these elements need to be considered before you even create the type of dragon that you're looking to go through and create. And that's because all of these things are going to come into play in relation to the end result of what you want your dragon to be, as well as how you want them to behave. Once you have those things defined, you can go to the story template panel again and pop open the dragon template. And then all you have to do is simply click on this generate. And that's going to give you some random starting points that you can use in order to go through and flesh out the rest of your character, specifically the dragon character. The next thing you're going to want to do is map this information to a particular type of dragon. In this particular case, I'm going to create an adult Moonstone dragon and use that as my basis template. And what you should do is create a copy of this particular dragon simply because of the fact that the ones that come with the module can't be directly modified. You can't unlock them. So all you do is you drag and drop a new dragon there, and you will get a copy of that particular dragon that you can then unlock and modify as needed. Now in this particular case, I am going to take the type of dragon and make it the non-ID'd name. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want to take one of these particular names here and throw that into this particular grouping here to make it unique to my campaign. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get a name that is going to simply roll off the tongue like I did during my previous test examples. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the Ervela Aradas name here, just simply because of the fact that I think it makes the most sense for this particular dragon. It sounds sort of moonish in my mind. You're then going to want to look at this other tab here and begin the process of fleshing out a unique description for a named dragon. I highly recommend you leave the Moonstone dragon elements and anything that's below that in place, and then just flesh out anything that is specific to our dragon here, and take the information that's here, specifically what their appearance looks like, what their mannerisms are, what their bond is, and what their flaws and their secrets are, and sort of come up with a paragraph or two that describes that as part of this particular process. Now, I'm going to use an example of a dragon that I created prior to the creation of this video. So this particular dragon is going to be done, and I'm going to load up Nim, another dragon that I created earlier. In this particular case, I created a dragon called Nimrith Eldin, and I got a story template that was defined by that particular process here, and took that information and created a paragraph to describe some of the behaviors, what this particular dragon is interested in, what their appearance is, things like that. And I even explained how their teeth are crooked, because that's one of the feature changes that was, or appearance changes rather, that was rolled here. Now, this particular dragon is not necessarily benevolent, but he's also not evil, so it's a neutral-ish kind of dragon. And in this particular case, they have a number of minions that are going to be found scattered about their particular lair. So those are kinds of things that you're going to want to take into account when you go through the process of actually creating a lair. And this is just a short example description. You can make this as short as you want or as long as you want, and the more detail that you have, the better you're going to be able to roleplay that particular dragon at a later point in time if you take another party through this adventure, say 2 or 3 years down the road. But essentially, at this point, you will have a dragon that is going to be unique to your campaign. You will have defined what their end role is going to be. You have defined how the party is going to interact with them in that respect. And you've created the NPC that's going to represent that manifestation of what's in your head around those particular concepts. Now that I have the dragon, they need a place to live. So I'm going to go ahead and, to help keep the duration of this video somewhat short, simply utilize an existing lair specific to Emerald Dragons, because all of the concepts that I'm going to need are defined here. And there are 2 reasons why I'm going to want to do this in a campaign that I don't necessarily have a whole lot of time to go through and flesh out. And the first is that it's going to be quicker, as all of the elements that make up an Emerald Dragon's lair are already here. They're in place, and all I have to do is actually fill it with any traps, minions, or treasure, as well as the dragon itself. And the second is because there's already a player map defined that already has line of sight and vision and lighting functionality already linked into it. So all I really have to do is populate it. This doesn't mean you could not take the time to make a map of your own. And that is the key word there. If you have the time to do it, then I highly recommend you do, because it makes it a little bit more personal to you, and you will remember the details of that particular lair a little bit better than when you just quickly threw together. In my case, Nim is a dragon who's open to talking with others, so their traps are going to be kept in areas that are near his vaults, or in other areas his minions deem should be kept secured. In this case, Nim has a lair hatchery, and that goes along really well for when he's eventually going to meet another dragon, and maybe they have an interest in procreating, and this is one of the reasons why he has these minions, because he sends those out into the world to find other dragons who might be interested in meeting Nim, and because of that, the access to his lair is fully open via the main stairwell on the northeast side of the map, which is right here. In our example here, I'm only going to define 2 key locations, specifically the Treasury, where you will find most of his horde, and that'll lend itself to the next section of the video, as well as to the Great Hall, where Nim is most likely going to be found. So to do that, I'm going to open up the story page here, right-click, and create an item. I'm just going to move that off to the side for the moment. I'm going to call this the Great Hall. I am then going to paste some information specific to Nim, just to simplify the process of going through and creating it, and then I'm going to pop this open and drag his icon there so that you as a Dungeon Master will be able to gain access to it, or myself at some point in the future if I run this campaign. Now all I have to do is click on this to open up information about Nim, but at the same time, I want to link this particular story element into the map. I do that by dragging this icon and just simply dropping a pin onto that map. Now, as I said, this is simply a very brief example, so this is not necessarily a complete descriptive story element that you would use in a normal campaign. You'll want to flesh this out a little bit more. But the concepts that I'm trying to portray here, where you create a story page, give it some information, and then link it into the appropriate section of the map, that's all relevant to going through and populating and creating your Dragon Lair. The next thing I want to do is provide where the Horde is going to be. So that's going to be the Treasury. And for that, I'm also going to copy and paste the contents of that for something I've already previously written. Oops, close that out for now. I don't need this because these are the only two rooms I'm going to do. Now what I need to do is drop this pin here. And normally what you would do is you'd throw things like traps and your loot parcels and all of that in this particular page. And we'll get to that when we get to the Horde section. I'll work on the Horde that we're going to place there in a moment. But I want to point something out that Fizban does in relation to dragons themselves and explains some of the concepts about what specific dragons might have an interest in when it comes to various kinds of treasures. You can find that under that Draconicon. Specifically, what I'm looking for is the Emerald Dragon, which is right here. And I'm going to pop this page open a little bit so that I can get a little bit of screen real estate back here and not fully clutter the rest of the screen. Specifically, you're going to want to scroll all the way to the bottom of whatever dragon information sheet you're looking for. And that is because the section that covers that particular type of dragon's treasures interests are down here at the bottom. And they even provide tables that would be specific to that particular dragon on the various unique items that they can find, typically in those treasure vaults. Because of that, you're going to want to create two separate loot parcels. You're going to want to be creating one that is specifically the Horde itself, but then you're going to want to roll this in order to go through and create the dragon art objects that are going to be specific to that particular dragon. How many times you roll on this table is entirely up to you. But what's going to happen is that when you roll, you're going to get a particular loot parcel. And in this case, it's going to be an Inort badge. Now, for an adult dragon, there might be a handful of those particular art objects that you might want to supply. So I generally recommend that you roll once for each age. So from a wormling to a youngling, that would be one roll. But from an adult, that would be 2 rolls. An ancient, that would be 3 rolls. And a great worm, well, you don't need to worry about a great worm. It's not necessarily a rule that I will always follow, but it's what I personally do when it comes to these dragons. And there are definitions in Fizban that defines how many art objects a dragon will typically have in their horde. To limit the number of parcels that I have to link, I'm just going to simply combine these two items here, because chances are if the players find this, they're also going to find that. That way, all I have to do is drag and drop one of these into this particular story element here. And I don't have to worry about the second one, so I'm going to lock that. And we have now defined what our Emerald Dragon's interests are when it comes to their art objects. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the Horde itself. You can also use this information sheet to define the Emerald-specific personality traits, what their ideals are, even including adventure hooks, as well as what you might end up getting from a connections point of view specific to the age of that particular dragon. You'll notice that great worms have no connections. That's because their primary goal is destruction at this particular point in their lifespan. Creating a dragon horde works very similar to creating a normal horde in relation to the Dungeon Master's Guide. However, Fizban introduces a dragon horde specific set of tables that you can use to create anything specific to the dragons in this particular module. There are a number of fundamental concepts that you want to take advantage of when creating a given dragon's horde. The first is you must consider the age of the dragon, and that's going to define the age or the size of the horde itself, and whether there are more than one. And that links to the concept that a dragon might have multiple lairs scattered about the world, and that their hordes are linked through some item that is in a given horde. And that is called horde linking, and the items that are used to create that link will provide a little bit of a hint in relation to the players as to how they can access the other locations. And you can find details about that underneath the linking horde items here in order to actually go through and figure out how that functions. I won't be covering that concept in this example, but keep it in mind for your own campaigns, because it is going to allow you to potentially extend the adventure by allowing a dragon to escape and have them head to another lair that they own. Another element is the effects of a horde in a region, and if there are any quirks about that horde that could put the players at risk. And you can find information on what those quirks could be as examples, for instance, as to how you want to link that into that particular horde. And as you can see, there's a lot more complexity now to simply creating a dragon horde. But these guidelines simplify that process and dumb it down for you enough to be able to make it a quick process. And once you've settled on all of those ideas, you're going to want to jump to the Creating Horde section of Chapter 4, which is right at the bottom of the chapter, in order to find an appropriate information guide needed to create one or more hordes associated with that dragon. Now, in our case, we want an adult dragon. So what that means is that I need to find the table that creates the adult dragon's horde structure. So I'm going to search for adult, and I'm going to switch this back to all. And I want adult dragon horde. Creating a horde is just as simple as clicking on this particular button here, but you're going to want to control the output. By default, it's going to dump it out to the chat window, which would be a royal pain in the butt in order to convert that into a parcel. The good news for you is that Fantasy Grounds allows you to do that. You can dump it to chat, into a story element, into a parcel, or into an encounter. I personally prefer the parcel because then it's compatible with the inventory page here of the party sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this roll. And when I do that, you're going to see right away that it's going to start to roll a whole lot of things. It's going to start off with a lot of the coins that this particular horde is going to have, and then it's going to go through a series of subsequent rolls to try to populate all of the different elements, such as magic items, art objects, gems, and mundane items that can normally be found in a horde. The issue is, this can take a very long time. I've sometimes gone and gotten a coffee and then come back and it's still not done. So I will return once this has finished. So it is finally completed. And I've intentionally done something so that I can point something out to you. And this is the reason why you're going to want to have the Dungeon Master's Guide loaded. Because when it gets to the point of rolling the magic items here, all you're going to get is this. That's an indication to you that you don't have the module loaded. And that's because it didn't have a table to roll against. So it didn't trigger any subsequent rolls. So this parcel is technically, quote unquote, invalid. Everything else around it is valid, but the results associated with these magic items is not. So I'm going to quickly load the Dungeon Master's Guide and then go through and reroll and show you the difference between these two hordes. So that took about 5 minutes to complete the roll. And the reason for this is something that should be quite obvious. On the left, you can see the invalid set of rolls, and you will see things like 1,000 gold piece gemstones. Well, you have 5 of them, but it's not telling you what. And that is because on the right-hand side, we can see that things like the ambers exist, or black pearls, or bloodstones, emeralds, things like that. And I have no idea how to pronounce that one. But in any event, this goes to show that when it tried to roll the gemstones, when it tried to roll the art objects, as well as the magic items, it couldn't find the table to roll against. So that's the reason why you have this listing here as opposed to this listing, which is a lot more succinct as to what the party is receiving. In addition, you also have your armor. So I think I saw a adamantine chainmail armor, for example. And there are other magical items that come into play here as well. Potions of giant strength, things like that. That means that with the Dungeon Master's Guide loaded, you now have a more complete and properly formatted horde table, or horde parcel, if you will, rather than whatever this is supposed to be. And to make sure that it gets linked into the Treasury section here, all I'm going to do is drag and drop this into place. And it's just going to add it there. And now I have a very quick linkable object that I can throw into the party's inventory page here when I award them a particular object or loot parcel. And that's how you create a Dragon Horde. As you can see, the Fizban's Treasury of Dragons module adds quite a bit of new content to the 5th edition's Dungeons & Dragons rule set when it comes to dragons, and it allows you to essentially flesh out your dragon lairs much more fully. I really look forward to when I can incorporate a dragon lair into one of my own campaigns using this module, and I encourage others to add to the comment section below their own creations so that others can use them for inspiration. I want to thank you for watching this video on behalf of Smiteworks and myself, and I also want to thank Smiteworks for providing me the opportunity to present this information on their channel, and I look forward to continuing with our collaboration. Please click on the like button if you found the information in this video useful to helping you learn how to use Fantasy Grounds Unity, as well as creating your own dragons and dragon lairs, as well as magical items associated with dragons. And consider subscribing to the Smiteworks Fantasy Grounds YouTube channel to keep up to date with new content as it is released. If you have any questions or comments about this video, feel free to post them in the comment section of the video below for others to see and contribute to the discussion.